Coming up, a Sad Styles production.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mikey Aaronworth, signing on to the Sign Off of Frameworth podcast for yet another week. It is the podcast where we talk about all the stories you didn't know you wished you knew about the world of sports and sports marketing. I'm joined in studio by Brian Aaronworth. A peek behind the curtains. You've been out of town for a while, so
yes.
it's been quite a bit since you and I have sat down across the room from one another.
Well, you covered for me. You did an okay job.
Just an okay job. Yeah. You know what? I was I think the fame was getting to my head a little bit. I thought maybe you'll never come back from Florida.
I did listen to your podcast in the car on the way down to Florida to see the Crosbys. So
you know what? I was surprised. I wasn't sure if you'd listen if you weren't on it. So it's good to hear that you're still interested in the content that we're putting out there. That's Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth Marketing, if I didn't mention that before. As we always do on the podcast, we have a guest who we want to get to. But before we do that, read off a little bit of a review. We want to show some support to those of you out there listening and lending us a hand by going to iTunes and giving us a rating and review. A reminder, on Spotify, you can now rate the podcast. Give us that 5 stars. It always helps us out quite a bit. So this podcast review comes through Apple Podcasts from Ty Katz Chad. Amazing podcast is the title, 5 stars. I listen to every episode and absolutely love it. As a Rangers fan, I've told the Rick Nash story to all my buddies. Keep up the great work, guys. Thanks, Chad Vardy. So Chad, thanks for the review.
I know what I want to give him. He's a Rangers fan.
He's a Rangers fan.
I think we got a Brian Leach autographed photo that we're going to send you. And Mike, you'll tell you how to get it.
All you got to do, Chad, is reach out to us, signoffpod@frameworth.com, 30 days from the launch of this episode, and we'll get that sent out to you as a show of appreciation for leaving the review. If you want to open yourself up to potentially receiving some free signed 8x10 photos, potentially some pucks and things down the line, just go to Apple Podcasts, leave us that rating and review. As I mentioned, it does a ton of work for us. Plus, it's just really good for my ego. I kind of need that sometimes. Times are tough right now. We went through a hard 2 years. I could use the ego inflation. But without further ado, we've got our guest waiting in the wings. Today on the podcast, we've got a legend in our midst. He spent 25 seasons coaching in the CHL, with 22 of them dedicated to the Battalion, both in Brampton and North Bay, where he often served double and even triple duty as their GM and director of hockey operations. He ranks among the winningest OHL coaches of all time. And did I mention he's earned a bronze and silver medal in the World Juniors as head coach of Team Canada? I could go on, but I'd rather just introduce today's guest, Stan Butler. Stan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem, guys. I just hope you appreciate I'm in North Bay, Ontario here. So as I look at myself in your mirror that shoots back at me, that's what happens when you've been out snowblowing for 2 hours and you have what we call in Northern Ontario toque hair. So I apologize to anybody out there that knows me and says, oh my God, he looks like his hair's standing up. Well, that's what happens when you get 15 centimeters of snow.
You know what? I think it just looks like you're too cool for the interview, and it goes a long way. Like those kids who show up to school with like one strap of their backpack hanging on and the other one off. Like you just look like you're showing up with a little bit of swagger, like a little bit of ease you're bringing in here. And you know what? You've earned it. A career that I can't wait to get into. And before we touch on the specifics, you, Stan, and my dad, Brian, have quite a history together. And I know I mentioned at the top of the episode that we like to talk about things like outside of the rink in the realm of sports, like memorabilia and that sort of thing. You guys have worked together in terms of your communications and relationships with some players entering the league, and you continue to do so. Dad, do you want to lead us off?
Well,
by maybe
I met
a little bit
Stan for the first time. I think going back, I don't remember specifically when. I do remember some good circumstances. Stan, of course, is very good friends with Troy and Trina Crosby and the Crosbys, going back to when Sid was in the minors. And then I met him specifically that I remember when we took over the exclusive memorabilia for Matt Duchene before he even hit the NHL.
Right.
And of course, Stan was coaching out in Brampton. So that's how we first got together and with the Duchenes and Matt himself. And so that was the beginning. And then there's been a lot of fun times since.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of fun together, Mikey. We've been to a few Stanley Cup parties in Cole Harbor together. I could tell you funny stories about Troy, how he became my roommate when I used to run all these camps that Sid was at. But Brian and I were at a few Stanley Cup parties, and then we were at a 21st birthday party at Fox Harbor that
was pretty awesome.
It would fit right up there with the type of parties that your family's used to. It was a 3-day thing, and I think for the first time ever in Fox Harbor, by the end of Sunday. There was no booze left, so it was a true Maritimes party. And,
It's an East Coast party. What can I say?
Yeah, and then we just went from there. We became friends. I heard you say Ricky Nash. Ricky played for me in the World Juniors. He was he's a Brampton boy. I can still remember once him knocking on my door in my office there, and he said, "Stan, do you mind if I sit down and sign a bunch of stuff?" And I said, yeah, no problem. Who's it for? He says, Brian. I says, well, if it's for Brian, you can sit down and sign it. So, yeah, there's been even a lot of players that have sat in my office and signed stuff for your dad that your dad didn't realize where they were signing the stuff, but it happened to be in my office. A few of my Sharpies were on a few of his stuff.
There you go. Some behind the scenes. I like that info. By the way, before we go too much farther from this, you mentioned parties and the one in Fox Harbor, for example. Happy belated birthday to you, Stan, February 2nd, just last week as of the time of this.
Yeah. I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm born on Groundhog's Day. So, I have a special needs daughter, Sarah, who's 31, and she calls me and she's not excited that it's my birthday. She's excited that she's going to tell me what happens to Wirt and Willie. So,
Actually,
it's an interesting day when your kids feel your second fiddle on your birthday to a groundhog.
Well, funny you should mention that. Sarah.
Yes.
From PEI.
Right. Sarah from PEI.
And so your birthday's on the 2nd, Stan. Mikey's on the 3rd. And we got a very special message from
Sarah
out in PEI and Louis, her father, and they did a video message for Mikey, a little happy birthday song. And I wanted to give her a shout out before I forget. So we're going to post a picture of her and her dad on this podcast after we finish taping. And so to your daughter, Sarah, and to this Sarah out in PEI, Tignish, who are big listeners, two very special young ladies. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't forget about that.
Yeah, no, good call. That was a moment on my birthday that I'll never. Legitimately, one of my favorite moments of the birthday was getting the video of Sarah singing "Happy Birthday" to me. So thank you so much, Sarah. You know what? I can't wait until I turn 34 and maybe I'll get another video. That's now what I'm looking forward to.
Sorry to digress, but
the unfortunate thing for you on this podcast is the other two guys that are involved in it. They can't remember when they were 34.
I got to take advantage while I'm still here. Stan, I want to talk to you a little bit about your early goings on, and we'll get a little bit more into the memorabilia side of things and the industry of sports beyond the rink. But I do want to talk about how you first got involved. You're a man who graduated from Brock University with a bachelor's in phys ed, eventually earned a master's of education in U of T. Was coaching always in the cards for you, or did you just kind of figure at some point that you'd be able to pair your master's of education with your history in phys ed and use that to communicate to some of the kids and players out there to sort of give them some guidance?
No, I never thought I would be a hockey coach. I started off in being a school teacher in Scarborough. There's no such thing as Scarborough anymore, but to us Scarborough boys, there will always be Scarborough.
Sure.
I taught there for 15 years. I moved up the ranks. I became a phys ed consultant. But at the same time, as a kid, I was, played hockey for Wexford Hockey Association in Scarborough. And then what happened was the president of Wexford had called me at one time. He said, Stan, we're looking for a coach. It was my first year teaching. He said to me, would you coach for us? So I started coaching minor hockey, minor Adam. I'm probably the only guy that ever did this, coached Team Canada World Juniors, but right. I actually started coaching 9-year-olds, 72 bursts. So they're all going to turn 50 this year.
Wow.
And I started at Wexford. In the first couple of years, we just got pounded by the Marlies with guys like Eric Lindros and, the Nats with Todd Simon and Paul Capizano, who's an agent now. And they were good teams. And then we just got better and better. And then by the time we got to be Pee-wee, we had a pretty good team. And we won the All-Ontario Pee-wee, All-Ontario Bantam, All-Ontario Midget. So then what happened was the Wexford had a junior team and they weren't doing very well. They were in last place. So they said to me, Stan, would you take the junior team over, which in the Metro Junior League, which, it's not really a league like it now. And I took that over and coached there for 5 years. First year we lost in the finals, Game 7 overtime, too many men on the ice, sound like Don Cherry. And then we won the league 4 years in a row. I was lucky enough on that team to have players like Anson Carter. We ended up with, I think, 72 or 75 scholarships in 5 years. And we had a very successful program. But I was pretty happy doing what I was doing, whatever. Then I got a call from the late Frankie J., who was the general manager or was a consultant for the Oshawa Generals. And he said, would you ever consider coaching in the Ontario Hockey League? I said, I never ever thought about it. And I went and interviewed with the Oshawa Generals, and I coached the Oshawa Generals. We had two pretty successful seasons there. In 1995 in Edmonton, we set an NHL record that I don't think will ever be broken. 10 players drafted off one team in an NHL draft.
Wow.
And from there, after a couple of years, I built the team, but didn't build it quick enough. So I moved off to Prince George and had a big awkward kid there named Sidney Chara. And then from there, I came back to Brampton, and that's how I got into the hockey. It was not by design. All the schooling I did was to be a teacher, / principal, or whatever the case may be, because I had so much success, in minor hockey, then in the junior A league. Obviously, people came calling for me, and I decided to make a career change. There's a lot of people, when I made a career change, thought I was an idiot. It was a severe cut in pay to start. But in the end, I've got to represent my country 6 times, once as an assistant coach with World Juniors, twice as head coach of the under-18, and once as the assistant. I've got to travel the world, and I met a lot of great people like your dad and people through hockey. And from there, you end up doing camps and things like that, and it just goes on and on and on.
I do want to touch about some of those seasons that you mentioned early on in your career and some of the success that you did have. But it kind of occurred to me, I because I didn't know this about you, I can look up your stats and I can look up how long you've been coaching, but I truly didn't know whether the intention was to get into coaching, what your love and affinity towards hockey was. Those are a bit more subjective. And you mentioning that was kind of never in the cards, or at least not something in top of mind. What do you think it was about your coaching style or your personality or your people management skills that gave you that huge hit of success so early on, that made you take to something that other people trained to be doing? You kind of went ahead of them just because of your own, I guess, raw talent?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this sounds silly, but a lot of people that knew me in my teaching days would tell you I was a basketball coach and a volleyball coach. I think I've always been a coach, and not being boastful, but I always won as a coach. It didn't matter. I was winning Scarborough City basketball championships, volleyball. I think there wasn't a sport that I coached in Scarborough we didn't win at in some time. So I always knew I could coach, and I always loved to coach. And then I think what happened with hockey, quite frankly, at that time was one of the few sports that you could actually make a living at as a coach. So,
right.
It was unique. And I guess the reason I got to where I got to is because when you win all the time, then I guess people want to take a chance on you. But I think winning
will jump you up the ladder ahead of other guys that are more trained but aren't winning. That's for sure.
It goes a long way.
Yeah, and you know what? It wasn't a goal of mine. I didn't wake up one day and say I want to be a hockey coach. It just happened. I mean, I was a pretty average hockey player. I was a jack of all trades, master of none. I played all different sports. I played basketball, football at the senior level in high school, played lacrosse for Toronto Beaches. I did everything, but I just loved sports as a kid, and I loved that. And yeah, I mean, it was just funny how it happened. And, when I look back, probably what my strengths were was I always thought I was a good communicator. I thought I could motivate well. And I think my biggest strength was just honesty. And I don't know if that's a strength in today's society with the newer player that, now they seem to want to be coddled more and stuff like that. But, I think they were the things that allowed me to be successful. I mean, if you know anything about the GTHL at the time, I mean, the Nats and the Marlies were dominant at every age group. So for us at Wexford to kind of move up there and kind of push them over, and win, that was something that was kind of pretty neat in those days.
I want to jump in here and just say this because obviously I know Stan very well, not as well as I'd like to because he's a long way away right now, but
that's some nice fishing around North Bay. You might be able to.
I love seeing you guys at the cottage at French River. I kept telling Troy there, I said, tell Brian to get on his boat and he can pick me up on the dock.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah, we can come down to Georgian Bay and work our way up there for sure. But what I will say is that if Stan went through all the players that have crossed his path, either by coaching or coached against or whatever, and I was with Mitch Marner yesterday, And actually, when you and I were talking on the phone, and Mitch was
I heard his
waiting for
dog
us.
barking. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but I mentioned to him when I got off the phone, I said, "Do you know Stan Butler?" And he says, "Well, I've never," and he's, more current guy, but absolutely knew you, respected you. And I think all the players that you've coached or crossed paths with, I've never heard a negative thing about Stan, the way he coaches or coached against. He's a very well-liked coach from everybody from players to players' parents, which is also really important at that level. And going right to one of your best friends and good friend of ours is Troy and Trina Crosby, who still stay in touch with you on a regular basis when sometimes, things in the past that people lose touch, but they never did because that was a special relationship with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously Troy and I spent every summer together when Sid was young, and I was the guy on the ice training him. But, it's funny in life, and Brian, you're kind of the same way. Like when you meet people before they make it big, and, I can remember, taking Troy and Sid to the Dairy Queen in Canmore, Alberta, and, we would have fun and put different things on people's jackets and stuff like that. And, we did a lot of fun things. I mean, we spent all our time together. We spent our summers together. I mean, when we're together for 4 weeks, we're the only two adults there, basically, him and I. I mean, you spend a lot of time. But I think what happens, and the same when I had Jason Spezza when he was 15, I think when people trust you and they know what you're like and they know you're not out to gain from it, that's what develops good relationships, and that's what develops loyalty. And, unfortunately in life today, sometimes loyalty is something that's
more about money
put on the
and
back
profits.
burner.
Yeah. But the true people stick with you and stay in touch even when you're way up in North Bay.
In North Bay. Well, I want to kind of tie what the both of you just said together with a question, because, you mentioned, Dad, that, all the past players, even some who have never played against or played under Stan, have the utmost respect. I mean, he's a name, especially in minor hockey, junior hockey like this. One thing that I wanted to ask you, Stan, I was listening to an interview with Wojtek Wolski recently, and he said something that I was reminded of when you said, certain players in the modern era need a little bit more coddling. He and Paul Bissonnette as well said that they preferred
those guys well.
They preferred that style of coaching. In fact, something that Wojtek said really struck me. He said some coaches would beat you down and then put you in the rafters. In other words, they would tear you down and then they would forget about you, not give you a chance. He said he'd beat you down, but then he'd put you back on the ice the next shift. How did you balance that sweet and salty coaching strategy? And do you think that was kind of at the core of some of your success there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets back to what I said about being honest. Like, these guys are in the development league. They're trying to make the National Hockey League. If you don't tell them the truth and they don't learn what they need to do to get there, then they won't get there. But at the same time, you got to realize that they're teenagers. So it's no different than being a parent, right? You kind of put out the discipline or tell them what they need to do. And then, you pat them on the back and you send them back out there. And no one ever learns anything without being told what to do first. So that's my attitude. And I think, with the players that took the time to get to really know me, this morning before I went on with you, I got a couple guys that played for me that in American Hockey League, and I was talking to them about things that, I think they need to do to keep it going. When you develop those long-standing relationships with people and people know that, you may whack them on the back, but God darn, no one else better. Like you've got their back. I think they appreciate that. And, I always laugh. I always remember one of the great quotes is I went to a former player of mine, Rafi Torres, retirement party, and it was up in Vaughan, and I was there and everybody was there. And, Raph played for me for 3 years, and he was a 6th-round OHL pick. So he went from a 6th-round OHL pick to, 5th overall NHL pick. He scored the overtime winner in Russia for us against a goalie named Henrik Lundqvist. And I remember his dad there, and, we had our differences for 3 years, and he comes to me, goes, Stan, for 3 years, I didn't know whether I'd like you. He says, but now when it's all over, he says, I realized everything you did for my son was great, and I really appreciate it. And I said, his name's Juan. I said, Juan, don't worry about it. I said, but I will say one thing. In your particular situation, you have 18 million reasons why to like me. So, at the end of the day, sometimes tough love, and I'm sorry, you know what? You're the person you are, but people that know me, I might give someone a little bit of shit here or there, pardon the language. But if they needed me at 12 o'clock midnight, I'd be the first guy at their house to help them out.
It seems to be what kind of matters the most. And I'm curious, as a coach, as someone who's managed to balance the reputation and be, give a little bit of a stick along with the carrot. When you hear people in the media who aren't involved in coaching starting to churn a narrative about a specific coach that seems to be negative and perhaps is based on coaching style. Let's use Mike Babcock, for example, a guy who's seen a ton of success in his career. And I'm sure that it's really difficult to maintain a room, to give a little bit of a push, and then also to make sure that people are liking you, where that may not have been as important in the past. What is your perspective when you start to hear these coaches being questioned in spite of the success that they've seen? Do you think there's anything they could have done differently? Or are you just thinking, thank God I'm not coaching right now because my style may not have been as appreciated as it once was?
Well, I think what makes you good sometimes leads to your ending, if that makes sense. And
sure.
I think what happens is, unless you're in college hockey or football, I think the reality of the National Hockey League in today's era is everybody has an expiration date.
Right.
So, most coaches today, no matter whether they're good, they won whatever they won, most of them, there's a time span where they're really effective, and then rightly or wrongly, it's time to move on. And I mean, I coached against Mike in the Western League. He was in Spokane, when I was in Prince George. Obviously, in life, you wouldn't have the success he had if you weren't a great coach. But, sometimes in life now, people aren't as patient. People aren't as forgiving. We have social media today. We have Twitter. We have Instagram. People can, voice their opinions that 10 or 15 years ago wouldn't ever be in a position to have a platform. So I think in this day and era for NHL coaches, I think it's very, very difficult. I think probably they all have a window now. Mm-hmm. And what makes them good is they believe in themselves. So if something happens and they get let go, it's a job that very few people to get to retire on their own terms. Mm-hmm. Very few people get to decide what happens. The way people get jobs is people get fired. The way people get, it's just the nature. So
there's only so many spots.
It doesn't matter what you do in 210. It's what you do today. And that's just life. If you're into coaching, you accept that. And that's what it's all about.
Right.
Now, you mentioned, coaches having expiration dates. And one of the things that I think is most amazing about your career is you spent 22 seasons coaching Brampton, both in North Bay and, the Battalion, both in North Bay and in Brampton. 22 seasons is a long time to serve with one franchise. You were at the time, up until 2019, the only person who had ever coached for that franchise. It started out though as kind of a little bit of a rough patch. You had a lot of successful seasons leading up to the Battalion. You mentioned the season in which 10 players were sent to the NHL draft. And then starting in Brampton, you didn't make the playoffs. And that was one of only 2 times that had happened during your tenure. Was there a point in that season or after that season that you started to think, perhaps my luck has run out? Did you start to doubt yourself, or did you know that all you needed was that one extra shot to get the team back on board?
Well, firstly, we got to understand, I don't want to mean to make excuses, but we were an expansion team that year,
right? And
2 teams came in at once. It never happened before. So before, when expansion teams came into the OHL, you would get 15 or 16 players. But because us and Don Cherry's Ice Dogs came in, what happened is we only got 8 players each. So I was lucky enough to work for a great owner all those years, Scott Abbott, the inventor of Trivial Pursuit. And we made a decision, him and I, that we were going to go with a glorified midget team. We had Jason Spezza as an exceptional status player. We drafted. I think we took 14 or 15 kids out of the draft, and we went with a really young team. So we knew, like, no team makes the playoffs expansion unless you're the Vegas Golden Knights, and then they realized the way they set up the rules were wrong. But we didn't pay $500 million to get in.
Sure.
So we knew that was going to happen. And I was a coach. Like, if you look at my background, before I went to Prince George, they hadn't made the playoffs in 8 years. They hadn't won a playoff round since Grant Fuhr was a goalie 15 years before. We went to the conference final out there. They've never, ever in their career done any better than that. Right. We just knew that was going to happen. And then what was the goal was the next year, Jason Spezza actually got drafted by the Ice Dogs because they finished behind us, and we got a guy named Jay McClement. Year 2, we made the playoffs, and which at that time was phenomenal. I think we improved 51 points, and we finished 6th in our conference, which means that there was 4 teams that could have played for 20 or 30 years that we went by.
Right.
And that year when we made the playoffs and went 6 games in the first round of the playoffs, the Ice Dogs finished last again. And we kind of had a different strategy. So, you know what? I wasn't worried that year. At the end of the day in hockey, it's a results-oriented business. At the end of the day, my last year or two in North Bay, it kind of caught up. It was a combination of a lot of things. I had some health issues that I had to overcome. The team on the ice wasn't doing very well. And, that's hockey. People got to make changes to try to better the team. They're doing very well right now. All the guys that work there were guys that I hired. I think they're doing a good job there. Some of the guys that were there when I started as young guys are key guys in their team. But, the reality of junior hockey is it goes in cycles. And that's just the nature of the business. And,
well, it's not like you can keep the players year after year for 10 or 15 years.
Right,
you got Sidney Crosby never left Pittsburgh, but that's not the case in junior hockey.
Well, I'll give you a good example, guys. In 2008, 2009, we lost in the finals to Windsor Spitfires. I think they had 15 guys playing in AHL, Ryan Ellis, Taylor Hall. I can go on and on and on. We lose to them in the final. Well, at the end of the year, our 3 best players are all eligible to come back. Duchene would have been an 18-year-old. Evgeny Grabchev, who played for Russia, star at the World Juniors that year, would have been a 19-year-old. And Cody Hodgson would have been 19 years old. Well, at the end of the day, what happens? Cody starts the year in Vancouver and gets injured and basically doesn't play. Matt makes Colorado as an 18-year-old and comes second the Rookie of the Year. And the Rangers, because Evgeny was a Russian, decided to put him in the American Hockey League, which they're allowed to. So even though you should have had a better team than the team that lost in the finals, now you lose all those guys.
Right.
Well, you're back into the mix. So junior hockey's tricky because a lot of things have got to fall into place. You got to have good players, but not too good of players.
Right.
And you got to realize that usually the teams that win have the better older players. And if you have exceptional players like, I don't know, Rusty Klesla, Ricky Nash, these type of guys, they don't see they're gone by when they should be the key players on your team. And that's the challenge in junior hockey, really.
Right.
Well, it's such an interesting perspective knowing that, they got to play well, but they can't play too well because then the better they play, the fewer players you have returning to you. And then you almost have to start back from scratch. And yet the reputation of the team also plays a factor because if you're not doing well enough, no one's going to want to come play for the team.
Exactly.
It's tough to balance that.
I can give you a great example. It's Brent Burns. Brent Burns, we drafted in the 4th round. He was about 5'10", and we sent him to Duchene to play junior. So he went 1 year as a 16-year-old. Didn't even play in the OHL at 16. Went to play in Duchene. Next year he came back. He's 6'3". Mm-hmm. He played probably on our 3rd line most of the year. We got an injury in the playoffs, and people don't know this. Brent Burns got drafted as a right winger. And we moved him up to our 1st line with Jay McClement, and he lit it up in the playoffs, had an unbelievable playoffs. Well, Minnesota drafted him 24-25 overall. That was it. He never played another game for the Battalion. So that was a guy that only played 1 year in the OHL. No one ever thought he'd make the NHL at 18, and he did. And now he's won a Norris Trophy. He's got some interesting commercials, to say the least.
and a great set of teeth.
Other than Joey Thornton, might have one of the best beards in the game.
You know what? I find it amazing because as you talk to Stan, and I've known him a long time, but memories come back of the guys that have he's coached, that he knows. Like, they all know him, and a lot of the guys played for him, big stars, you know, and some of the greatest guys in hockey. Maybe that's a reflection of Stan's influence on them. I know Matt Duchene, one of the nicest guys that I've ever met, will do anything for you. And his parents are great. These are the people that I know that you know. Most of them are just exceptional people, but it blows me away that people, the big stars that have that Stan's touched.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, you've already mentioned Matt Duchene. I mentioned Wojtek Wolski. You mentioned Cody Hodgson, Rafi Torres, Jason Spezza. Those are some of the bigger names. Some of the guys who have come through and had more points than many of the other players who have gone through the battalion. Who do you think, or maybe you don't have this off the top of your head, but maybe the most underrated player that you've coached?
That's an easy one for me.
And
who most underrated player ever to play for the battalion is a guy named Barclay Goodrow. Barclay Goodrow played 5 years for me. I love that guy. He never got drafted, which was a joke. He played 5 years as a junior. His last year, it's our first year in North Bay, we were an underdog, and we got all the way to the OHL final and lost to a very good Guelph team that had a line of Detroit Red Wings of Fabry, Bertuzzi, and Suter. I mean, I look at their team. We made life difficult for them, but they won. And then Barclay goes to signs a free agent contract. I give a lot of credit to my fellow Scarbarian, Brian Marchman, for doing that after I bugged him for a long time. And then he goes to San Jose, does a really good job. Then he gets traded to Tampa Bay. Everybody tells me, oh, what a bad trade. He gets traded for a first-round pick. And he didn't get traded he got traded for a first, but they got a third back. At the end of the day, he goes to Tampa, wins 2 Stanley Cups, was a key part of the team, signs a very, very nice contract in
New York.
And, I was lucky enough to go to a Stanley Cup party in Aurora this year, and it was kind of neat because it was almost like a reunion of all the players. And, to see a guy to do what he did, never drafted in the NHL, played 5 years as a junior. That's a great story.
I love that because I wasn't, some coaches are going to want to play coy. They don't want to favor one over the other. I love that you had an answer ready to go with that one. Similar question. Maybe this one you might be a little bit more hesitant to answer, which if that's the case, that's fine. But is there a player that you maybe thought underperformed compared to how great they were at the level playing in for the battalion? Someone who maybe you expected to go a little bit farther that didn't quite make it there.
Yeah, that's one that, out of respect for a hockey player, never, as good as you guys are at your job, it's funny when you reflect on your career, and I've had a lot of time to reflect because I haven't been doing a whole lot of much other than shoveling snow. At the end of the day, great hairstyle too. At the end of the day, like, there's guys that you think for sure are going to make it that you coach and they never do for one reason or another. And, and then there's other guys you coach that, God love them. You love them as people, but they find a way. And
well, sometimes,
I think as a coach, it's no different than a teacher. There's always guys that you wonder, like, could I have done something more to help that guy or prepare him more for pro than I did? Or was it just something else I couldn't do differently? Sure. And, that's the tough part. But yeah, you get guys. I mean, you always have guys that you think would do better, or, not even do better, but play longer. And then you got guys like, even when I was out west, I still stay in contact with Zdeno Chara. I mean, when he was 19, did people think he was ever going to win a Norris Trophy? No, but they didn't see him in a weight room and see the animal he was. I mean, young Eric Brewer on that team who played for me, who ended up being a first-round NHL pick. I mean, he had a hell of a career. I mean, I had an overage goalie that when I got there, quite frankly, they wanted me to trade, and I love the kid. And now he's in Nashville as the color commentary, Chris Mason. I mean, yeah, there's guys that, that make it and have good careers that you're really happy for, because I guess Chara would be a guy, believe it or not, he's going in the Hall of Fame. But most people, when they saw him at 19 and, he had to play in the Kentucky, like he had to play in the American League. So guys like that amaze you. But, yeah, you always got guys, like, let's be honest, you always have guys that are high expectations but never live up to them.
Well, you know what, Stan, you'd have a better eye than anybody. And I know a lot of agents and players want to get some inside track from your expertise. And Pat Brisson is a good friend of both of ours, and different guys throughout. I dealt with Pat, you dealt with Pat, and other agents, and I'm sure they're always trying to get your perspective on an up and coming player, and sometimes they work out. And even you would have a better perspective, but I know how many times Pat's called me and told me that this guy's going to be the next great player, or he's really worth.
He's going to be the next Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, well, how many times I've heard that. But then when they told me about Sidney Crosby, he was going to be the next Wayne Gretzky, and he turns out, he's right there. So, but a lot of the times we've signed probably, and we talked about this yesterday, I probably signed more deals with Pat and some of his players as they came into the league,
right?
That were, and I'm not mentioning any names, but we're never, lost a lot of money on some of those guys because Pat would tell me they're the next great thing and never made it a year or two into the thing. And that's just the way it is. Sometimes they just show, look at first round draft picks, Alexander Daigle, Yakupov, who's a really nice guy back in a couple of years in the league, and he's back in Russia right now. So these number one pick, and he doesn't make it into the league for more than a couple of years. You know
what, Brian? What I used to always tell agents is when they give me a hard time, and I had a good relationship with all of them, 3% and nothing's nothing. Mm-hmm. So you know what? The one thing I did is I always had a track record of getting the most out of players, and I'd argue with anybody that disagreed with me because I think even being an old guy, I know the analytics well enough to know bell curves and how guys get better. But the reality with the agents is 3% and nothing's nothing. And, it's funny. You got me thinking of a funny story, but I remember the first time I ever met Troy Crosby. That was when, what's it called? IMG and CAA were amalgamating, and it was to do with, Tom Rich was leaving to go to Pittsburgh with Mario, and Mike Barnett was going with Wayne, and Eddie Meal, they were heading. So JP Barry was bringing the IMG guys, Patty Brisson was bringing the Rich guys, and then that's how people don't realize that's how CAA basically became the sports, what they are today.
Hockey side,
and I remember I got to LA, and I bumped into this guy there, and I remember I say to him, what are you doing here? He says, well, my son's here. He's only 14 years old. So I flew out, and I knew the list of guys were on the ice, and I go, oh my God, 14 years old. Like, that's unbelievable. And then, because we were the only two adults at the camp, like we spent every day at the pool together, everything. And I remember we go on the ice, and
no cocktails involved, right?
Yeah, no cocktails. Not us, not in California. And we went on the ice, and a lot of sunburn, though. I'm paying for it now every time I go to the dermatologist. But, at the end of the day, we practiced. I still remember Simi Valley, California. We went there, and it was about a 45-minute bus ride. And it wasn't a rink like we know in Canada. Like, you had to go upstairs to get to it and everything. So a very good friend of mine, as Charlie Hodge used to call him, M10, better known as Eddie Meal, he says, I'm coming on the ice, Dan. I'm coming on the ice. Yeah, sure, Eddie, whatever you want. You can do the goalies. You're from Windsor. I'm not going to argue with you. So he come on. So Sid's on the ice. First time I'd ever seen Sid skate. He get on the ice, and it was just like, wow, this kid's unbelievable. Right. So he's unbelievable. He's going around the ice. I'm just like, I've never seen a kid like this, right? He's got his bubble on. He looks like he's 11 years old. He could get in, under 12 for the movie theater. So we run this. So, Eddie, as you guys know, is best friends with Wayne. They've been friends since they got traded in Indianapolis. Eddie goes, I'm calling Wayne. You got to know Eddie, Italian style. I'm calling Wayne. I'm going to get Wayne to come here to see this kid. It's unbelievable. I said, yeah, okay, Eddie. I mean, Wayne's really busy. I'm sure he isn't going to come. So sure enough, we're having beers that night, and Eddie says, guess what? Wayne's coming tomorrow. I said, oh, great. He says, he's going to bring his equipment stand. He's going to skate. So now the only time in my coaching career, I'm nervous. I'm like, I got Wayne Gretzky coming on the ice. I'm running a bunch of teenagers through drills, and I'm bagging them and making them skate hard. And now I got the greatest player that ever played hockey, and he's coming on the ice. Like, what do I do, right? And obviously, I knew Wayne pretty well through Eddie a couple times. I hate to admit it, I was their designated driver from the Four Seasons Sheraton in Toronto to Brantford and back, so they could play golf. So there's we all knew each other. I was at Wayne's semi-retirement with Tommy Bidoff at the restaurant there and stuff. And Brian knows how that works. And Mikey, you probably do too. And
we had Tommy on the show.
At the end of the day, he shows up the next day. He pulls up in his Mercedes, whatever. It was just like a beer league commercial. Would have been great. He pulls his bag out of the back of the trunk and gets on. And he, the only thing that changed is he came and sat in the ref's room with us. And so I just looked at him and I said, Wayne, like, what do you want me to do? And he goes, Stan, just treat me like one of the players. Now my heart's going boom, 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 boom. Anyways, we go on the ice and he ran and we had a stupid little drill where if you're last in, you got to do a lap. And I think one time he was last in. He probably would never remember this. Only the coach would, because I had to say, okay, Wayne, one lap. and he had to go and skate around the ice. But it was actually funny because then a guy I went to high school with, talk about a small world, his name's Garrett Joyce. And we grew up together, went to Monarch Park Collegiate in Toronto together. He ends up writing a Sidney Crosby book. So
I was going to say,
if
he's
you read
an
the
author.
book, there's the chapter of, Team Canada World Junior coach Stan Butler runs a practice when Sidney met Wayne for the first time. And then after the practice, obviously, you know what Wayne's like. He took Sid and his dad back to had lunch. And I think in those days, Sid was playing with the Dartmouth Subways. And if I recall, he came back with, you remember the 2-piece sticks, like the blades and that?
Yeah. Oh,
so he came back with blades signed because in those days, the kids had to fundraise. So he had a couple of Wayne Gretzky's. He was doing Brian's job before Brian. So, and he got it.
He never told me that.
And, it was great. And he signed them. And that was the first time. And I was amazed. And then, after that, Troy and I became real good friends. And I mean, obviously, Sidney was like we still stay in touch. Sidney, not a lot, because I don't bug him. But, he's been amazing. Like I have a special needs daughter. And I'll tell you a funny story about that one, Mike, and then I'll let you lead the thing. But this is a good story. So every year, Sidney's the kindest guy in the world. So he sends Sarah a Christmas present. So you got to understand, she's globally developmentally delayed. So she gets her Christmas present and she's fired up. And then he's sending her a dozen sticks. Well, she plays for the Durham Dragons special needs hockey. Like one stick would last 6 years. But anyway, she's got them. So the one time, I think it was Sid's first Stanley Cup, and we're all there. And Sarah came down. So she went back to school on the Monday after it was over. And about Tuesday or Wednesday, she's in a special needs class. I get a call, Mr. Butler. I said, yeah. Are you Sarah's father? I says, yeah, I am. I need to talk to you about something. I said, what'd she do wrong? He said, well, Sarah's a lovely girl and everything, but we were doing current events today at school. And she said to people that she spent the weekend in Cole Harbour at Sidney Crosby Stanley Cup party. And she got to hear the great big C in the backyard and this and that. And,
awesome.
We just don't want our kids exaggerating because a lot of our kids here come from different backgrounds and we don't want them to think this is a thing. And I said, I stopped the teacher and I says, I'm sorry. I forget what her name was. I said, that's true. Sarah spent the weekend in Cole Harbour. Yeah. She went on a boat and heard a band there. And then Sam Roberts band the first night and then the Great Big Sea the second night. And
in the backyard.
Cupcakes and we had everything and you guys were there. You know what it's like. So then the teacher's like, really? And I said, yeah. She goes, oh, okay. But I just thought it was a funny story because here they think my daughter's a bullshitter. Yeah. And we never said anything to people where we're going for the weekend. So it's current events. She figures I'm just going to tell people what I did on the weekend, right?
Wow, 9 times out of 10, the kid would be lying about something
like that. Yeah, it would be bullshit. So here the teacher's trying to call me to say, hey, your kid here, we got to muzzle her. She's not telling the truth. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that story. It's great also to get some perspective on how you were first introduced to Sid and to the family. I mean, over the course of your career, as you mentioned, you would have had so much contact with so many of the players and so many of their parents, so many of whom have so many great things to say about you. Over the course of that career, I mentioned earlier you spent 22 seasons with the Battalion. One thing that I'm curious about, you managed to win your division 5 times. You won the conference finals twice. It's very clear it's a very accomplished career. Even just in spite of the fact that you coached at one franchise for 22 seasons, leave the World Juniors out of it as well. I'm interested in this because that should be enough for most people. This is going to sound like it's unrelated, but follow me for a bit here. There's a race car driver in F1. His name's Daniel Ricciardo, and he's actively considered to be the best current driver not to have won a world championship, potentially, especially with Verstappen just having won. Now, he was asked in an interview recently, because it's looking like he probably won't win a world championship, whether that would be an element of regret in his mind, looking back on his career, or if the points that he's put up and the wins and the lives he's touched, is that enough? Do you share? And he said, yes, he said that would be enough. And it's a great interview answer. And I'm curious, do you share the same sentiment regarding the OHL championship and then potentially the Memorial Cup? Or is that always something that you really wish that you could have gone?
Yeah, I mean, I no disrespect to your racing car driver. I look at it differently than him. Yeah, I reflect on it. I have numerous times. Yeah, I mean, listen, and we have goals and objectives, and did I reach most of my goals? Yeah, I did, but there's some I didn't. I mean,
right.
You know what? In my time in the OHL, is it disappointing I never won an OHL championship? Absolutely. Is it hard to win? Yes. Do things got it? Yeah, it's something that I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah, it bothers me. I won 4, whatever they were called, Dudleys in Junior A. I won the Quebec Pee Wee tournament. I won 3 All Ontarios. So I'm a guy that's used to winning. And
right.
Yeah, it's disappointing. And it's the same with the World Juniors. I mean, I was the assistant coach in 99. We lost in overtime to the Russians. That was disappointing. And then, when we won the bronze, I mean, really, that year was in Russia. And anyways, a bunch of guys got sick. And it was a team, the team did as well as it could do. And then, in 2002, we lost 5-4 to the Russians in the gold medal game in the Czech. So, yeah, I mean, the two things that I went back in 2015, coached the Ivan Alinka team. We went 7 straight wins and we won the gold medal, which was nice. But yeah, would I have liked a World Junior gold medal and an OHL championship or a Memorial Cup? Absolutely.
I think that's a fair and great answer too.
That's competitive that says that's not a bit disappointing is
bullshit.
Not telling the truth.
Right.
Now, this may just be semantics, but does the fact that those are off of your resume, does that make you consider your career incomplete, or are you okay with where it is? Granted, you could have you could have wanted it, but is your career, does it stand on its own to you, or in your mind, is there an element of it that feels unfinished? Not just like I would have wanted it to have gone a certain way. Do you feel like your career has been complete? Well,
I mean, obviously, you know what? I mean, I would have loved to win those things. But, I mean, I guess I could look at it the other way at World Juniors. I mean, I never got to coach World Juniors in Canada. I never got to coach World Juniors in North America. I went to Russia. I went to the Czech Republic. And when you look back over the years, not everybody medals over there. I medaled every time. And, we did win. When I went back in 2015, and there were some people that probably thought, oh, God, what are they bringing this old guy back to do this for? And that was a 98 team with guys like Victor Mete and Nolan Patrick and Brett Howden and Pierre-Luc Bois. And we won the tournament, pretty easily in the end. That was good. But, I mean, yeah, there's always going to be, I don't know, 5% of you that feels like, disappointed that you didn't get to that. But at the same token, is your career a total success if you don't win those things? No. But I guess the other thing is you got to look at it sometimes, and it's hard when you're a competitive person, that compared to 98% of the people that have done your job, you're better than them. But yeah, it still burns my ass. I'm going to be honest with you. I think about it every so often. I mean,
here's what I would say.
And the silly thing is, both times we went to the OHL final, what would have made it worse is if we were favorites to win. Mm-hmm. Neither time we were favorites to win. Right. So, it was disappointing we lost. And, but, the teams that beat us both went on and won Memorial Cups.
Here's what I would say about Stan's career. Yes, there's always, things that disappoint, but anybody that looks back on his career is going to say he's one of the greatest coaches that have ever coached in those leagues. And you put yourself way at the top of that list, and you can't be disappointed with that. You can't have any regrets. Do you want to win some things you didn't win? Look at Marcel Dion, one of the greatest players to play the game. two things happened to him. One, he never played in Montreal, which would have been huge for him and his career now, and after his career. And the second thing is, he was one of the greatest, but he never won a Stanley Cup.
Right.
And that's because he was playing in LA. And he almost, he could have done it. So does that diminish what he did in his career? No. He was still one of the greatest of all time, and everybody considers that. He didn't get the accolades. He didn't get
I think there's a lot of guys, Mikey, like that. Like Joe Thornton's never won a Stanley Cup. He's still going in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
Jerome.
Well, there's a lot of those guys, yeah.
Yeah, Jerome's the same. I don't know if he won one. I mean, at the end of the day, it's tough. I mean, the other thing, too, when we played in Brampton, when I reflect, some of the teams that we had in Brampton, if we would have been in North Bay where you had a sold-out building and crazy crowds, it might have made a difference. I mean, I can't tell you as many times, and I love coaching in Brampton. I love the city of Brampton, but you know what? We played a lot of playoff games in that rink where there was more people cheering for the other team than cheering for us.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I asked the question because, from the perspective of someone like myself, I look at those careers, the careers of Jerome McGinley and Joe Thornton as well, and think that it's phenomenal. Like, to me, absolutely a complete career. I'm always curious about the subjective analysis of one's own career, and that's
no, you don't. You're not satisfied, and that's what hopefully separates you from other people.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
There's a couple of things. You're never satisfied, and you know what? You're never going to give up. And I mean, that's what makes you good drives you crazy. Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. What makes you good drives you crazy. I mean, it's no different than Sidney Crosby. We've all been around him. I mean, I always laugh, with Sidney after I got to know him. And then I did that. I was working, believe it or not, I know you can't tell, but I actually used to do the color for TSN for all the Hockey Canada things. And I went to Acadie Bathurst, and Paul Hollingsworth was the guy, and nice guy. And I look back, Paul Hemming was the producer, or the director, who's now running TNT. He's the Turner broadcast. He's the head guy for Hockey Canada. Mitch Kersner, whose brother is Ed the Sock. If anybody didn't know that, that's a true story. His brother Steve Kersner is the real Ed the Sock.
Oh wow!
Mitch is doing the Chicago Blackhawk games, and the play-by-play guy was a guy named Dave Randorf, who's now doing Tampa Bay, and then the color guy was this guy Stan Butler. So we went and we flew down to Acadie Bathurst, and anyways, in the semi. Dartmouth Subways played, what's it called? Red Deer Optimus. Red Deer was stacked. I think the game was 8-7 for Dartmouth. It was like Sidney and Mikey Chason was a goalie, Honest Mike there. And at the end of the day, they went 8-7. I think Sid had 6 or 7 goals, and they win. So then with TSN, you got to do this meeting kind of before the
pregame,
before the game. And I go in, I don't tell Hollingsworth I know Sid. So he's telling me how great Sidney is and this. And I said, oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, geez, yeah, I've heard about the guy. Then we go in and we have this meeting, and Sidney sees me. He comes right over, gives me a hug. I stand. And Paul Hollingsworth, that we called Hollywood says, you didn't tell me you know him. I said, you didn't ask. But what I'm getting at, the next night they played the Tisdale Trojans out of Saskatchewan. Great name. And they played them, and it was 6-1 for Tisdale. And you look down on the ice after they lost, and they were the first maritime team ever to get to the finals of the Air Canada Cup, or whatever they call it. TELUS Cup now they call it, TELUS Cup. And you look at Sid when he takes his helmet off, and he's devastated. And, they shouldn't even have been in the final.
Right.
Other than Honest Mike, his buddy, the goalie, I don't think there's another kid on that team that played one game of pro hockey. But he is so competitive. Right. He's so upset that he didn't win. And I mean, I'm not saying him like that, but yeah, I mean,
you are in the coaching world. You are.
Sure. Yeah, you want to win, and it bugs you. And when you see guys, let's be honest, we all compare ourselves, and you see guys that have won something that you think you're way better than. That burns your ass. You're like, oh shit, But sometimes it's just right in the right situation. I've seen guys come into the OHL, win a championship, and 2 years later never get a coaching job again. They were just because at the end of the day, the greatest coach ever, Scotty Bowman. Okay? Right. So Scotty Bowman in Montreal was unbelievable. Scotty Bowman in Pittsburgh was unbelievable. Scotty Bowman in Buffalo, guys thought he couldn't coach anymore. Scotty Bowman goes to Detroit, he's unbelievable again. Huh. You're only as good you got to have a certain level of players to have a chance to win.
Sure.
And the challenge is a lot of times in junior hockey is a lot of the best players never play there after 18. So it's getting harder and harder to build a team. And you look at college hockey right now. Yeah, I know you have viewers in the States. You look at the University of Michigan. Unbelievable team. All these first-round picks, Owen Power, Brendan Brisson, Hughes, all these guys. On paper, with all these NHL guys, there's no way they should lose. But then they play Minnesota State, who's coached by Mike Hastings, is a very good coach. The average age of his players, what I've been told, are like 23 or 24 years old. At the end, they might beat the University of Michigan, and people would say, how did that happen? Well, maybe the guys are too young. You know where I'm going? So you never know.
So many variables. We're running a little low on time.
Every time I do an interview, I get told that. So go ahead.
Well, no, but I'd love to get you back because there's so much more to talk about.
Haven't even touched on your national coaching experience, which would be an episode in and of itself. So many other questions remaining, but we're gonna have to wrap this up soon. I want to lead off with one final question, and if you can sum it up, maybe in a word or a sentence, because I want to boil this down to its essence. Is there something you can recognize in a player where maybe other people can't recognize it, regardless of how many points they're getting at the level that you're coaching them, that tells you this guy's got what it takes to make the show?
Long-term potential. I've always been very, very good to look at a player and not see them for what they are today, but see them for what they could be 3 or 4 years from then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Barclay Goodrow, Nick Paul, who never got drafted till the year later, and go on and on. But that's something I've always been able to do, is project long-term potential.
That's got to be part of the talent.
I just want to say one final thing. So, Stan, I'm heading up tomorrow to hopefully see Sidney score his 500th goal in Ottawa with Troy and Trina. I'm going to tell them about this. They've agreed to come on the podcast in the next couple of weeks to talk about what it's like raising a superstar. I'm sure your name will come up a few times in that interview, but I'm going to tell them they got a big job to fill after your interview because and Troy, I'm sure, will tune into this one just to hear.
Yeah, well, the only thing I'm going to say about the Crosbys, because I'm very protective of people I love, and obviously I love them, is there's a reason why Sidney is the kid he is, and that is because of the parents that he has. And
absolutely.
Troy and Trina, you couldn't get better hockey parents. I've sat with Troy at 1 million games. A, he knows hockey. B, he's very objective. And C, all he ever expected from his son is to give the best effort and be the best he can be. And you know what? If more hockey parents were like the two of them, maybe I'm not saying there'd be a lot of Sidney Crosbys, but maybe there'd be more than one.
A few more, yeah.
That's great. What a good note to go out on. And yeah, we'll see. As of recording, it's tomorrow that you're going to be going to Ottawa. So
when
today,
you hear this, I will be in Ottawa getting ready for the game.
There you go. Listen, Stan, an absolute pleasure to interview you. If you've got time down the line, I'd love to have you back.
No problem. I just tell you a quick funny story. There was a guy named Sherry Basson who's a bit of a legend on the OHL, and there was a show called Off the Record with Michael Landsberg.
Yep.
And he was the bullpen guy. So every time someone didn't show up to Landsberg's show, Sherry would bail them on and come in. So I'm going to tell you guys, because I love you guys like family. If you ever need a guy coming out of the bullpen, just call.
Hey,
that's awesome.
Love that idea. And if you're ever looking for more stories and more content relating to Stan, at Coach Stan Butler on Twitter. Anything else you want to plug? Anything you're working on? A website you want to send?
No, I listen. My day to day is I have a Siberian Husky.
Hey.
He's a beautiful dog. His name is Crosby, and he's a superstar in my world, just like the real Sidney Crosby. And took him to daycare today. Do a little snow, go to the gym, and try to compete with people that are much younger than me. And then, just watch hockey at night. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And, we'll just see where it goes.
Well, when you get down to Toronto, Stan, we got to go out for a beverage and maybe a meal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds good, Brian. And, good luck in Ottawa tomorrow. Bobby Jones, my assistant coach, is sitting there, and I known DJ for a long time. And as much as I love Nick Paul, I hope he forgets one of his assignments tomorrow night and Sid can slide in and get that goal and get it over with.
Perfect.
The elusive 500. Okay, great. Thank you once again, Stan, so much. What a fantastic interview. For Stan Butler, Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth Sports Marketing, and myself, Mikey Aaronworth, this has been the Sign Off Podcast, and this is us signing off. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we made it to the end of yet another episode. Thanks again so much for joining us. You can find videos of all of our episodes on YouTube by searching the Sign Off Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at Frameworth Sport or Instagram at Frameworth Sports. And hey, if you're not sick of me yet, you can find me on Twitter over at Retrograde Mikey, or you can always find me embarrassing myself over on Instagram at Aaronworth. The Sign Off is a proud product of Fadoo Productions and Sad Styles Productions. Executive producers, Mikey Aaronworth and Andrew Bascom. Until next week, this is Mikey Aaronworth, signing off.
Furnished by Sad Styles Productions.
Get into it.